Alright, this is a follow-up to my last video comparing GSPro to Uneekor. I wanted to look at E6 and look at some of the differences here from a distance perspective. So thankfully this seems to be working, but I have both GSPro and E6 up and running at the same time. I am also still running my launch monitor software, which I have to run both each simulator. In the GSPro, which is on the left, I do have my launch monitor carry listed on that left-hand column, so we can at least see the differences when we're comparing GSPro to E6. We'll also have the launch monitor data there to see. I did run a test earlier today on both E6 and Creative Golf. Creative Golf was very similar to GSPro on the distances. I can do something on that later, but I was seeing some significantly different distances on E6. Generally speaking, I was much longer with my irons. I think I was looking at about 8 yards difference with a pitching wedge between my launch monitor and the software. The more spin I got, the further it went, which kind of leads me to think that they're not calculating spin decay properly. And then with driver, I was actually significantly shorter than my launch monitor software, unless I had high spin on the drive, in which case the ball went a lot further on E6. I'm going to see if we can get those to replicate in this test and hopefully get this one to record properly. But this kind of goes back to why I stopped using E6 a while ago. Distances just seemed inconsistent to me between my launch monitor and what I see in real life. I wish they could fix it, but it doesn't appear that they have, and I don't know what else to say there. But I'm going to start off with a wedge, which is again my 46-degree pitching wedge. I'm just going to hit a bunch of shots, look at the comparisons. At the end of the day, which one's right, which one's wrong, you don't really know unless you hit a ball and walk it off. But I can say that if I can get my launch monitor to be close to one of the simulators, then in theory, at least I'm consistent with those. And if I see huge differences, like I saw earlier on E6, that tells me there's a problem on one side or the other. All right. So again, like earlier on my test, I'll use a Pro V1, and this is a pitching wedge. Still nursing a shoulder injury, so I actually switched to a slightly easier on my shoulder mat. And let's see how this goes. So I got 121 carry, 122 carry on my launch monitor, 122.8 carry GSPro, 127.8. So launch monitor and GSPro pretty close, and E6 much higher. I have elevation set to 0 on everything, so this has nothing to do with elevation issues. No wind, and again, driving range, so it should be flat. So 122 carry launch monitor, 119 or 120 carry on the game, 129, again 9-yard difference. E6 going much further. This is a pitching wedge again. So we're looking at 120.7 GSPro, 123.5 launch monitor, 130, so 10 yards longer on E6. What I've noticed is the higher the spin, GSPro goes shorter than my launch monitor, and the higher the spin, E6 goes further. And I know from my actual play that the more spin I put on the ball, the shorter it tends to go for me. I have a sweet spot for each club where I can get better distance if I can increase the spin, and then at some point it just maxes out and I need more spin and it balloons on me. So from these tests, I have to kind of give the edge to GSPro, just because I think it's acting a little bit more realistic to my real life game. Again, another pitching wedge. So we're at 116 launch monitor, 115.7 gain GSPro, 119. That was kind of a little 3/4 swing that I put on that. Let me actually do a nice full swing here. My pitching wedge is usually about 130, 135 on a good swing. So I got 129 carry on my launch monitor, 126.6 GSPro, and 137.2 carry on E6. That is pitching wedge. So again, to me, E6 seems to be way too long for these swings that I'm putting on. Drop down to a 7-iron just to hit a couple a little bit longer. So this is a 7-iron. Left that one out. Yeah, I'm not hitting the ball far today, that's for sure. 147.9 versus 145. It's about 3 yards shorter for GSPro. 157.2, so 10 yards longer on E6. So 158 on my launch monitor, 155 GSPro. I'm thinking it's gonna be like 170. Yeah, 169 E6, which is just too long. All right, gonna move on to. Actually, I'll move on to a 5-wood. Just curious before I move to driver, hitting off of a mat, no tee. So 228 launch monitor, 228.9 GSPro, 230, so that's pretty close. That one seemed to work pretty well. All pretty close there. Can't argue about any of those numbers. Ooh, that was a miss. This would be a good one to take a look at. 204 versus 208 for GSPro. 219, so 15-yard difference from my launch monitor on E6. It's pretty big. So 226 carry launch monitor, 228, 247 E6. I did not hit that 247 yards. Alright. One more with a 5-wood, then I'll move to driver, where I'm expecting that to come up shorter. Alright. Left that way out. Okay. Don't play with a hurt shoulder. So 204 versus 209 versus 220. So hitting off the deck with clubs that have some amount of spin, E6 has been longer than both my launch monitor and GSPro by quite a bit. Now I'll move to my driver, which is even less consistent than my other clubs. So this should be fun. Oh, 244.4 versus 244.3 GSPro, and E6 is 248. And I want to look at the spin, because I notice if my spin is over 3,000, E6 goes longer. If it's under 2,500, it's shorter. My spin was 3124, so I would expect that to be longer on E6. If I can get one to like around 2,000 on the spin, E6 is going to come up way short. So it's about 2,800, I think. So 261 carry, launch monitor, 262 GSPro, 264. So 2,800, that's about 200 or 300 higher than my optimal spin. Having trouble keeping the spin down on with my swing today. Let's see if I can get it down a little bit high, a little bit lower. Not when you pop it up. So 234 versus 227 versus 242. So yeah, anytime it spins high, it's going longer. Yeah. 243 versus 245, and E6 is 245, so that's good. So yeah, right in that 25 to 2,800, you get similar results with E6. If I could only get one to spin where I normally would like to see it. Ooh, that's going to be much longer on E6. Yeah, it's one spinny shot. Yeah, 218, 223, 236. So yeah. All right, let me change drivers and go to my low spin, because that'll actually matter. Somewhere in here is my Callaway Epic Sub-Zero. This is one I can sometimes not keep in the air. So at 8, what is that? It's really low, 1,800 spin. So 243 versus 244 for GSPro. And 229. So again, that's very consistent with what I was seeing earlier. Lower spin, a certain amount, probably under 2,500. E6 comes up much shorter. Anything above really 3,000 spin, E6 really thinks that ball's flying. That's a good one. It's about 2,000 RPM, so 249 versus 244 versus 233. So again, that lower spin's coming up a lot shorter. Alright, I hate this club. I gotta go back to my stealth. My stealth might suck in the sim, but it works very well on the real course for me. And I did design the stealth to be spinnier. It's got a airspeeder, I think it's 51 gram shaft, and it's the regular stealth, so it's quite a spinny club, but we play in wet conditions here, so I like the carry. Just can't get around on it today. So 252 versus 253 on GSPro, and 252 versus 259, and that means the spin was probably over 3,000, 3141. So if you spin the ball a lot with driver, you're going to feel like a long drive hitter on E6. One more swing. Finally got one. Alright, so 2,400, that's my ideal ball speed. Spin. So what was that? That was 270 carry versus 268, 269 versus 264. So, yep. I'm going to stop there because I can't feel my shoulder. I'll say this. Doesn't matter what sim you use, as long as you're playing and swinging. If you really want to dial in your clubs and you happen to be using a simulator as your guide for your distances, based on my testing, I could trust GSPro. I could trust Creative Golf because that was pretty much right on line with GSPro. E6 I would not be able to trust. I don't understand what they do with the spin, but spin plays a huge role into how far they think the ball is traveling, compared to my actual real swings that I take at the course. And I do bring different launch monitors with me to the course, and my course has launch monitors built into the range. I know that my Uneekor system is pretty damn accurate. I know my spin numbers are pretty accurate, and I between Arcos and my launch monitors, I know my yardages for each of my clubs, and GSPro and Uneekor are pretty close to those real life numbers. E6 is just too far off for me. So hope this helped. I know there's been a lot of discussion about different numbers, and maybe it could be issues with data transfers from the Mevo Plus launch monitor, which has been, it's still fairly new. That interface is only a couple of weeks old, so there's going to be bugs. We dealt with bugs with the Uneekor. Still do every once in a while. The developers of GSPro are great at fixing it when they can. Sometimes they do need the help of the launch monitor company, so hopefully if there are any interface issues, or if the data is coming over garbled in some way and people are getting bad data out of GSPro, hopefully FlightScope folks will work with them. I think they're dedicated at this point, so but that's all I got to say. Any questions? Yeah, leave a comment.